Is the connection wrong? Nothing there. I'm unplugging and plugging in again. Let's try it out. There we go. We've got something hopeful there. Okay, it was still on its break, I think, but now it's back with us. Bringing peace and reconciliation. Yes, in the preamble to the UNESCO Constitution, this is United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, it's saying there, and remember that spirituality was firmly written out of all UN documents because of the presence of Russia and China at that time, strong communist nations. It says there, despite that, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is usually men, I think, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And of course, UPF is saying that absolutely, from now on, women are a key to peacemaking efforts. Hence the importance of, Women's Federation for World Peace as a kind of sister organization doing important work. Where, this was Father Moon's absolute conviction. He kind of declared the age of women. Religion itself, and it kind of goes a little bit back to some of the first comments we made, it's a restorative vehicle. It's there with the purpose of putting things right, if you can think of it that way. Father Moon said in 1990, why throughout history have people needed to improve themselves through morals, through ethics, through religion? Why should we observe them? It's because we sense something is wrong and try to return to our original standing before God. So that change means a change of nature. Someone was just reminding me of the kind of very difficult circumstances which are out there in the world. They look intractable problems. But I believe, actually, this process we were talking about or alluding to, this kind of change from selfishness to unselfishness, is an absolute key. It takes time, it takes education, but everybody benefits from that in the end. So there's a kind of incentive built into that, because human beings are looking for happiness. They want kind of, in the end, happiness. That has to be really pursued to the extent whereby it's like a change in the atmosphere. And I feel some of the progress that we've made in the last, decades, so that, today it's considered racist to say something which would have been said quite easily, 40, 50 years ago, without a blink, right? So that is a kind of progress. I don't see we have enough yet, but whether it's racism or sexism or ageism or these kind of things, eventually I think it has to come around to, yes, we are not accepting this kind of level of self-centeredness. It's not, well, we're going to put you in prison because of it. It's just like we don't want this in our society, and the kind of, it's almost like a environment change, right? It's just not acceptable to think this way anymore. That is, I think, the way it will happen. That's my belief. You may have a different idea, and I've often puzzled about that. How do we really make this kind of impact and change eventually? Religious people might say, well, it's talking about the coming of the kingdom of heaven or something, but it has to have that kind of change in a certain level, a threshold level of people, that then everything changes, right? Otherwise, we won't see that. But so when we look at this, how do we change our nature? We talked about our fallen nature. We talked about these tendencies. We could say, an original position or status, but if that is lost and we have a certain more miserable current reality, that has to be restored. For that, Father Moon used a kind of principle that he called the law of indemnity. Some price has to be paid. You have to do that. Just as if in a relationship, suppose you have a good friend and you trust each other, but you end up lying about something and that person finds out and they feel, well, you can't be my friend anymore. I'm so disappointed, right? So, but that also hurts you. You feel, why was I so stupid? Why did I do that? I didn't need to do that. And you'll set on a path to kind of restore or mend that relationship. And it will take time. And it will be the other person who has to say, yeah, I accept your apology. And, we're friends again, right? It'll need that kind of process to go through. But there is a way to do that. It needs that kind of investment or payment of indemnity. A conscious effort, we can say, to restore what was lost is needed, and that involves taking responsibility to correct any misconduct. And this goes for bigger things as well. It's the way forward to produce healing or produce some unity where there's been just enmity. So this process requires going a reverse way to how the problem came about. You have to do something consciously. It has to be related to the problem and it has to be in a reverse way. In the unification principle, in Father Moon's understanding, he called this restoration. Restoration has to take place. There are other kind of similar concepts in the world's traditions, whether it's enlightenment or salvation, or these all have some kind of connection to it. But to focus in on the principles which are necessary to be employed, he called it restoration. And restoration is whenever can take place when you have an opportunity to put right past mistakes. Those opportunities will come along, right? And giving in to the same temptations as before, the same tendencies, will only continue a destructive pattern. So what do? You make a conscious effort or conscious decision not to do that again or not to follow that same pattern. So you have this past mistake, you have an opportunity to put it right, and you consciously use that to do something different. That is restoration. And you will find opportunities like this in your own life, right? I'm sure. Some people, I've in counseling people, sometimes they've said, I have this problem with this person and I can't get over it. I'm going to move. I'm going to go to another town and find another job. Right? Do you think that will solve their problem? I caution them against it. I say, you'll end up somewhere where you find a very similar person that irritates you in just the same way. Right? Because, you can't run away from these things. You need to kind of put some restoration into practice. So you follow your conscience in this situation rather than repeating mistakes of fallen nature, things which, you identify this was, in this respect, my fault. So I have to follow my conscience and put it right. You break the cycle of abuse and you alter this pattern of what we call fallen history. So until restoration on a particular level is accomplished, you'll find the same problems will reoccur, and that's very necessary. So reconciling with God and with the higher values that we talked about is actually the first thing. This is the step that people take in a religious life, is to study Scripture, to seek insight, to pray, to meditate, self-reflection, looking at myself in light of this truth which exposes certain things, awakening the conscience. And I feel sometimes even these lectures are not just educating the kind of intellectual part of our mind. It's like washing over us so that you gain some, this is with any spiritual truth actually, you gain, the conscience is strengthened and elevated. You're not even aware of it happening sometimes, but it does that, right? You come out with a mind which is that little bit more oriented towards dealing with problems and understanding issues. So in religious life, some people focus or use means like confession, finding a person that you can confess to and getting rid of that kind of burden or pangs of conscience, restoring love for God, feeling that you're forgiven and feeling that you are given a new start. It's all very important. And people, pursuing this in religious life have sometimes chosen celibacy, poverty, obedience to the law or the rule of some monastery, or, it's all there. And still people are doing that. Many traditions have monks and nuns, right? Many different traditions, or people who are considered holy people, but they've given up a lot to pursue that. But they're all on a path to kind of pay a price, that something can be restored either in themselves or for the benefit of others or for the world. So some price is being paid, some reconciliation with higher values and with God. We call this kind of vertical aspect in religious life, right? You might have come across that or thought of it that way as well. Self-reflection, awakening the conscience. We think of kind of communing with the divine as something which is vertical, hence the kind of prayer postures and things that people use. But then that is not enough. We need then on that basis to restore horizontally a proper order in relationships with others. So success in both areas is needed, absolutely, to move closer to the goal of peace. This is borne out in such as the Holy Quran. It says the repayment of a bad action is one equivalent to it. But whoever pardons and makes reconciliation, his reward lies with God. He does not love the unjust, but whoever endures patiently and forgives, that is a sign of real resolve. That may not be your favorite translation. I don't know. I can't judge. But, it's certainly saying something very profound in that area. In the Christian tradition, you have this interesting guidance from Jesus himself. In Matthew, he says, if you're offering your gift at the altar, which is kind of good religious practice, right? And there, remember that your brother has something against you. It's an interesting way to put it. Leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. So put right that kind of a wrong relationship, or maybe hurt that you caused somebody, or even your physical brother, or spiritual brother. Go and put that right first. Otherwise, how can God really accept your offering? He knows about that, and you know about that. So it's, again, maybe you could say it's almost trying to introduce a self-centered element into what should be devoid of self-centered feelings, and that is, our relationship with God. So interesting, isn't it, that little story. Here in Sikhism, in the Adi Granth, where there is forgiveness, there is God himself. So reconciling with each other is so important. And in what could be the term central teaching of Jesus, at least he was on one occasion put on the spot and asked to name what is the most important law in the Torah. 600 and how many laws? 30? Something, which one is he going to pick? It was deliberately to put him on the spot, but he had no hesitation. He said, the first is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, or all your strength, some translations. That means this vertical relationship, love God first, right? He's quoting Deuteronomy. It's not his own words, right? He's picking out from the Old Testament, of course, a verse which is very much loved by Jewish people and said pretty much every day. But then he wasn't satisfied with that. He said, and the second is, he was asked to give one, but could not give one without the other. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. That is restoring the horizontal relationship, right? So he is putting it this way. That's the most important thing. These two aspects of reconciliation. And again, not his original words, but quoting Leviticus this time. A little more hard to find, a little more obscure, but he obviously knew it very well. So it's integral to other faiths as well. Let's look at Islam. It says, and be steadfast in prayer and regular in charity. Now, isn't that just those two ways, right? The vertical is your prayer relationship, and then charity is your love and, demonstrating that and offering something for the benefit of somebody else. Whatever good you send forth for your souls before you, you shall find it with Allah. So you're losing nothing by doing that. And somewhere, God knows what you are doing. When Father Moon looked at this story, I already kind of mentioned some of the things that he gained from the Adam and Eve story in the biblical sources. The next story that you come across is in the next generation. It's conflict between brothers, interestingly, right? Do you know this story? So Adam and Eve, they, had illicit love and inherited fallen nature. This is very much the parents' problem. The parents' problem. But that parents' problem gets visited on the children. And the next generation, it turns out that the elder brother Cain is the murderer of his brother Abel. So this is kind of cementing those problems in the next generation. And we see it's like a kind of teenage delinquency there. It's really serious, actually. Of course, you might say this is just a story. But if it's a story, it's very insightful into the kind of problems of the human condition. What is war? We're talking about peace, but what is war? It's fighting between brothers, right, essentially. And, it shouldn't happen. It started somewhere. And, these sources are saying it started right at the beginning. That's why it's so intractable and so difficult. But that is the reality. So this problem of the parents is visited on the next generation. And, we can say that it's a very, I find the psychology of this very fascinating. And just very briefly, Cain and Abel, these two brothers, are asked to make an offering. And God accepts the younger brother's offering, but he doesn't accept the older brother's offering. He feels that. Maybe he doesn't do it in the right way, or his attitude is wrong, or maybe there was fighting between these brothers prior to that, and he's coming to the altar in the way that Jesus talked about. He's coming to the altar, but not reconciling with his brother first. So he needs to do that. And God's words, as recorded here, it's for the purpose of telling this or giving this insight, it has God say to Cain, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Oh, right? That's a parental position, right? The parent has to, in a way, lay down the law. But if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? In other words, don't worry about, it's not a permanent rejection. But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. You have to get a grip on this. So this shows that we talked earlier about fallen nature, right? Do you remember that? And the steps going down, this kind of thing. This means that Cain was more kind of subject to those tendencies. He had this feeling. He had a resentment. He could easily turn to violence, and did. He killed his brother because of his resentment. So he was in that kind of camp where he's very much having to deal with a fallen nature. But if he deals with it in this given opportunity, that's restoration, right? And the family doesn't have that in it anymore, right? He's actually overcoming his problem and the parents' problem at the same time. And he's kind of cleansing that family of these particular tendencies. So actually, whether you think this is a real story or not a real story, the lessons which are there are very profound and very insightful into what is, the human condition and what we have to change. So this is actually an archetype of conflict, and this is very much what we're dealing with. I'm showing this to you so you can understand Father Moon's thinking. If we run through it rather simplistically, we can say Abel loved God, but couldn't win the heart of his brother, who was consumed with resentment. He was angry that his brother had his offering accepted and his wasn't. So this brings up resentment in himself, as we said, so that he can deal with it. Abel had God's blessing, but maybe he didn't share it or didn't help his brother. Maybe he could have gone to his brother and said, you need a hand with this? I can help you. And if his brother had a little humility, he could receive that. But that's not always the case, right? So Cain was consumed with resentment over perceived injustice. From his point of view, it seemed unfair, and he didn't see his brother from God's point of view, which is that first fallen nature, right? And he was jealous, he was angry, and he was unable to control his anger to the point that he murdered his brother. So this is it, most murders happen in families, in people that know each other. That's the majority, That's the human tendency. And most murderers, in that moment, they are thinking somewhere, psychologically they are thinking, if I get rid of this person, all my problems will go away. But is that the case? No, your problems are beginning, right? With that course of action. It's a multiplying and deepening the problem. So, this is an interesting pointer right at the beginning. This is, very early chapter 3 or something. What should happen? Abel should be humble, being accepted by God. He should forgive and be tolerant in the face of abuse. Maybe his brother is a bit angry and resentful, but he should actually have a good heart towards him, serve his brother, and he can melt that resentment. He has to be ready to help his brother and have him be successful. That's a wonderful thing for a younger brother to do, isn't it, right? So often we see struggles between older brothers and younger brothers, right? And each has a kind of responsibility. Cain, as the elder, has to overcome resentment and feelings of rejection, has to recognize his brother's value and rejoice in his brother's success. That takes some doing, doesn't it? I'm glad that your offering was accepted. Could you give me some tips, right? Could you help me in this situation? That's, if he can distance himself from the emotions, the negative emotions, there's an opportunity to overcome, to move on from hatred and to reconcile. So we see much, and Father Moon was really the first to point this out, that there's a process. Do you remember I said, restoration will come around again, an opportunity for restoration will come around, a similar circumstance. So he points out in these biblical stories situations which come much later, actually, generationally, but they're there to deal with that same problem. The same Cain-Abel problem was not solved in that first family. But there's an opportunity which can be there between Ishmael and Isaac. But unfortunately, things go wrong, and Abraham has an offering to make which he doesn't do properly, and things are delayed this way. So we see a falling out between these two brothers. Isaac is born from Sarah, the original wife of Abraham, because she was barren. Then he's allowed to have a child by Hagar, and that is Ishmael. Ishmael, of course, is at the start of the Islamic tradition, because this family is sent away, and there's division and unresolved tension in that family, which is not good, right? It comes down today in the kind of perpetual problem, it seems, unresolved situation between Arabs and Jews. But interestingly, in the next generation, between Isaac and Rebekah, then we see there's tension. Even while she is pregnant with twins, Esau and Jacob, she prays about something which is going on. She feels they're fighting in her womb. And when she prays, the answer is, 2 nations are in your womb. This is what she receives. and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. The elder shall serve the younger. That's interesting. That's restoration. It means the kind of one in the position of Cain has to come under and serve the younger one. And the younger, in a way, takes the position as if they were elder. So very fascinating. There's more than I can explain here in Father Moon's understanding, but it's talking about opportunities to restore previous problems, even in prior generations, and to get that kind of tendency written out of the lineage so that a purer lineage can persist. In a later story, then Esau is very angry towards his brother because, his birthright from his point of view has been stolen with mother's help and given to Jacob. But Jacob had to escape for 21 years to his mother's brother's land, that's the land of Haran, and was cheated 10 times there and somewhat learnt what his brother was going through and how he must feel, but wanted to reconcile with his brother. But his brother still had undying resentment towards his brother and was ready to kill him. But there's a very interesting story there where these two reconcile with each other. And Jacob kind of sets it as his goal to offer everything that he's built up over 21 years to his brother to reconcile and to heal that tension in the family. So as he approaches Esau, who's coming in the distance, he bows down 7 times. He sends ahead many gifts. And he said, "These are for you." And eventually, Esau's heart is just melted. He has a change. He overcomes his fallen nature, right? Which is very fascinating. So we see this is the goal of restoration. One person in one generation is exhibiting fallen nature. Somebody else has to come along and do the opposite. So Esau comes to love Jacob from God's standpoint. He restores a true elder brother position. He no longer seeks to dominate unrighteously, and it's a position where he can multiply goodness. Well, that sounds all very complicated, doesn't it? I think a lot of you are kind of drifting into a kind of another zone, shall we say, right? But if I can just, show how Father Moon made a real, very useful typology out of this, saying that there's a kind of Cain approach to life and an Abel approach to life. And that's why often in any issue that we see, it's almost like there are 2 sides, right? Any issue that is under public debate, there are strong 2 sides. Look at the last election, July the 4th, right? There are strong 2 sides, plus another kind of variations, a little bit more to that side or a little bit, more to that side, these different parties. And there's more Cain type, there's more Abel type. Abel, pursues a line through Jacob, and there's some restoration going on a family level between Esau and Jacob. But at the time that Jesus is born, what is the situation? There's a kind of tradition through Abel which emerges as Israel and its teaching and Judaism, but there's also a very Cain-type world out there, and that's the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, is firmly oppressing Israel and in charge of things. So there's a struggle there going on, a Cain-Abel struggle between these two. One line through Abel we call Hebraism. It's this teaching and way of life, if you like, which resorts more to faith, more to peacemaking efforts. There's also Hellenism, which is more focused on the external things. And, one is more the scientific area rather than the religious area. And there's a tradition there. Good and bad, it's not a simple kind of division between good and evil. It's just different approaches to life. One is more God-affirming, and one is more kind of focused on the good aspects of human beings in a humanistic way. So we see, interestingly, at this time, or just prior to this time, in a period 400 to 600 years before the birth of Jesus, we see the world goes through great changes. Have you heard people talk about this or read about it? Sometimes called the axial age or axial period. It's when a lot of developments are taking place, probably, associated with the development of writing and other things, because humankind is developing, but there's real spiritual change. You get in China the likes of Confucius and Lao Tzu, and these traditions start. In India, you get Buddha. In Persia, Zoroaster. You get, in the much older tradition of Hinduism, you get the Upanishads, which become so important. In Jewish history, you get the prophet Malachi, 400 years before Jesus, the last book of the what we call Old Testament. You get the Greek philosophers, Socrates and others in Greece, and this great profound change which influences for centuries, even today, Western history especially, and even world history. You have all these developments taking place. It's like a spiritual awakening. Wow. A spiritual awakening for what? Well, if we go back just to this diagram, Father Moon is saying his insight was that there was an opportunity. If Judaism had received and accepted Jesus, he could have lived and taken his teaching to a much higher level and brought these aspects of Cain and Abel together. There could have been healing on a world level at that time, but that opportunity was denied him. So he had to pursue a path of absolutely sacrificing himself, that he could offer spiritual salvation at least to as his legacy and be available to all who would follow him. So in this insight, Father Moon sees this is the plan for our first ancestors. This is another way of diagrammatically showing those three blessings or three foundations for peace. Do you remember that? That was way, way back in the morning when you first came. Seems like ages ago, doesn't it, right? Whoa, all that time ago, right? Gosh, we've come a long way since then. But there it is, to become spiritually perfect, a person of true love in whom God dwells, and then to inherit that true love of God and extend it to the world in the family setting, and then create a world where human beings and nature are in harmony. This is fulfilling those great blessings. But what could Jesus do? Jesus came in this understanding of Father Moon. You can look at him as like a new Adam figure. Even Paul used that expression as last Adam. New Adam figure. It's like a replacement or a new start for humankind, a new opportunity, a chance for complete restoration, actually. But Jesus can only fulfill, but it's so significant, he can fulfill this first blessing, right? And become a person of extraordinary spiritual standing and integrity. And that can influence people, as do all other founders, leaders, prophets, those in the major religions. They're influencing even way beyond, down the centuries. They're influencing people because of their personal integrity, because of their godliness, because of the God in each of them. So this was the opportunity to bring the tradition of Hellenism through kind of Greece and Rome and that tradition to unite with Hebraism, and then maybe go to the rest of the world. Those who kind of embrace this new ideology of reformed Judaism through Jesus and ideology of love could have gone to India, could have gone to China, could have gone to these places where there already was a great awakening taking place and the world would change. So in this understanding, Father Moon allows us to say, what if? What if things had been different? But isn't that our experience of life? Things could have been different. Not everything is absolutely determined. Things could have been different, depending on what? Human responsibility. What do human beings do, right? Human beings had a choice. They could receive Jesus or they could reject Jesus. In this particular instance, right? They've mistreated other people as well along the way. Isn't it curious? Have you ever wondered why such good people get mistreated and get, persecuted and get sometimes assassinated, and so much anger against them? But they're good people. It's a real battle going on there, There's the evil spiritual forces that we're alluding to. So, these produce two kind of worldviews, Cain-type worldview, Abel-type worldview. Because they weren't resolved or overcome 2,000 years ago, they've remained kind of two currents or two streams of thought that still give a problem today, right? This is where our conflicts come from. They're essentially Cain-Abel conflicts. In the individual, it's a conflict between body and mind that we talked about. Body is in the kind of Cain position, mind is in the Abel position. But this is the reason any kind of devotee wants to find a guru to follow, right? Because that's the route to a kind of higher level and to realizing unity in myself, centering on a higher purpose. I need to find somebody who's more Abel type than I am. And we see this division, especially very clearly in the 20th century, between the two great blocks in the Cold War, communism and democracy. Communism is Cain type. It resorts to violence, even through its ideology, promotes violence. And democracy is more peace-loving and has to engage in war in order to protect and to preserve, life. So it's a reluctant kind of participant, but is necessary. So you see the kind of same division between Cain and Abel, and as I said, almost any issue that's facing us today, you will see more Cain-type arguments and more Abel-type arguments. Sometimes both very well developed, right, and convincing to different groups of people. But what needs to come is a synthesis of these two. It needs that kind of synthesis because, in any argument, there's some good points and there are some bad points. Right? But the opposite to good give and take or give and receive relationship between subject and object, this takes us way back to the beginning. Do you remember that? This relationship succeeding. The opposite to that we can call polarization. And that's what we see. We see it often in the political world. That means you paint the other person as bad as you can, right? In order to emphasize the difference, Don't vote for them. If you vote for them, terrible thing is going to happen, and this is going to happen, right? And they're both saying that. It's to polarize people, rather than actually have a consensus of the good points, which are there. And sometimes you find the two arguments, when you look at them, are not that different, right? Am I saying too much today? You all right? So interestingly, if I can just be allowed to follow this through, because I said something quite radical, right, there about, if Jesus had been received. Actually, if you look at Jewish history, there are 6 periods. They're all, outlined in biblical history. It's a very accurate history of a people, extraordinary people, right? But because of the way things turned out 2,000 years ago, then this foundation was lost. And it has to be rebuilt. I mean, literally, the Jewish nation was scattered. It was no more, right? It was destroyed, and the temple was destroyed, and Jews were scattered around the world. And the nation was not constituted until, 1945 or 48. It's not put back together again. So that foundation was lost, and this is the role of Christianity as the second Israel, is to build that back up again. So when you look at Christian history, this again is Father Moon's analysis, which is quite unique. It went through very similar 6 periods, and his teaching looks at the real similarity between these periods and the purpose that God is leading people this way, rebuilding that foundation for what Christians call the second coming. Is to go through a particular period. But the last 2,000 years, have those been a kind of experience of heaven or hell?
More hell.
More hell than heaven, right? Full of conflict, full of enmity and war and misery for people, right? Life was very tough for people over those 2,000 years, but always with a promise, that things will be different. And Christian theology, which is so, important and beautiful in its own way, is, a very much a theology of hope, it's often referred to. So when you look at these periods of Jewish history and Christian history, you find that the length of these periods is very similar. But they're like 400 years, 210 years, extraordinary parallels. And that kind of period of time is way beyond the influence of any person or any generation, right? Are you with me? So something interesting is going on there. More than I can say today. I'm just alluding to that. But at the time of that period of preparation for Jesus, 400 years before, you had Malachi. In Western Christian history, you had Luther bringing about major reformations here, all looking forward for a time when someone will come who can bring an end to this conflict, who can be a restoration of parents, actually, not just Cain and Abel. Here you see an interesting kind of insight that it's not only Christian world that's expecting someone to come. Many religious traditions are expecting a return of their founder or some kind of figure coming in the future who can solve our problems, who can be, whether it's an avatar in Hinduism or Imam Mahdi or whatever. Here in Buddhism, it's talking about the expected one. This is a lovely description. Can I read it to you? Listen attentively with one heart, it says. A man whose spirit shines brightly, a man whose mind is completely unified, a man whose virtue excels everyone, such a man will truly appear in this world. When he preaches precious laws, all the people will totally be satisfied, as if the thirsty drink sweet drops of rain from heaven, and each and every one will attain the path of liberation from struggles. Interesting. What we need to do in this time is really rediscover the power of love. That was also a conclusion of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, we must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make men better, and love is the only way. That, of course, is restoration. If that was the problem, then we have to take the opportunities and put that right or do that correctly where we might have done it wrong in the past. He said we never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity. That's what we need to work on. And Father Moon said something along those same lines too, and I'll end this session with this quotation. He said, I'm teaching you to love those who hate you. If you love them, sooner or later they will come to like you. If you return good 3 times for every time someone does you wrong, eventually that person will bow his head. Try it yourself and see if I am right or not. Everyone has a conscience. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you. Thank you.
So we like to make discussion groups again. So maybe we have to reform the groups a little bit, but if the front row could turn the chair around and wait, maybe we have four or 5 different groups. I think maybe the second row turn their chairs around, and you can invite his brother to join you. Thank you. Could you make a discussion group also in middle and the back? Okay. Middle in that row and middle of that row. Feel free, you don't need to be press ganged into this.